Welcome to this video. In this video, we will use ReactJS to build a responsive navigation bar, in this one here, with a hamburger icon, as you can see, which we can click to bring up that side drawer. And that, therefore, gives us a nice page looking good on both desktop and mobile devices. We'll build this entirely from scratch without any third-party library, except for React, I guess. We'll write the components on our own, we'll write the CSS code on our own, and we will wire everything up on our own. So let's start. So let me start building that responsive navigation and side drawer. And for that, I'll create a new React project. I'll do that with create React app, a tool which I already installed. Link can be found in the video description, of course. And the command simply is create React app, and then the name of the project, I'll name it responsive navbar, and hit enter. And now this will create a new project for me and install all the dependencies we need, like, for example, well, React. Definitely one of the more important dependencies we could have. So this will take a little while. Let's wait for that to finish. And now that it finished, I opened it in my IDE, Visual Studio Code, and in there I'll use the integrated terminal to run that project. Now we can see the run command in the package.json. With the start script, we can bring up that development mode, development server, basically. We can run that with npm start or also with yarn start if you use yarn instead of npm. Either works. And that opens up a new page in your browser, this one here, and this is our starting React project as create React app gives us. Now in there we find some starting files, and as I said, I wanna focus on that responsive navigation bar. So I'll not build anything else here. Instead, let's just build that. And for that, I'll first of all create a new folder in that source folder, and I'll name it components to store my components in there, which I'll build. And the first component I wanna build is my navbar or the toolbar. So basically the toolbar at the top, and that will then have a hamburger icon which will open that side drawer. So I'll add a new component folder and I'll name that toolbar, starting with a capital T to indicate that this is a React component, which we will also use with a capital character in JSX. And in that folder, I'll create my toolbar.js file, which will hold that component. You could let it end with JSX, but that is optional. You don't need that to write JSX code in that file. So I'll just go with JS. So in there, I want to create a React component. And for that, I first of all need to import React from React. This pulls in the package and allows us to write JSX code in here, besides the build workflow, which will compile that to JavaScript, of course. And now I'll create my component in there. And I'll create a functional component, storing it in a toolbar constant, where I will get some props and where I will then return some JSX. And that is just a shortcut for using curly braces and a return statement. If we use an arrow function, we can omit that and just return our return statement or the value we want to return. And I'll wrap it in normal parentheses so that I can return one statement, but that will actually be multi-line JSX code. So in there, I'll then return a header like this. And in that header, I'll add a nav element. And in that nav element, I will have my hamburger icon, basically, and some other navigation items which I could have. So let's add that. And now in there, let's first of all add a couple of segments, so to say, because I will then add flexbox to position these elements in the toolbar. The first segment will be my hamburger icon, basically. So I'll add a div here for that. Then I'll add a div with my logo, which maybe should be clickable. So let's set this to a link, which goes to the root page, where I say the logo. Let's close that. And maybe also close that string here on the anchor tag. And then last but not least, I'll have another div which can hold further navigation elements to the right of that. And of course, that's just one possible markup variant you could use here. You can position things in all kinds of ways. This should work really well, though. Now let me add an unordered list in there to hold all these navigation items. Like that. And then every navigation item for me here will just be a link pointing to the root page because I don't have other pages. That could also be a link controlled with React Router though, so you could add the router link there. I'll use normal anchor tags, and then maybe we have products, and now let me duplicate this, and then we have users, something like this. Let me now export this toolbar. So I'll export this as the default of this file, and now I want to use it. Now to use it, I'll go to my app.js file, and in there I don't need anything of that. Maybe leave that wrapping div, but then I want to have my toolbar here at the top. Don't need the logo. Now for the app CSS, I will actually not need anything of that. So actually I can just get rid of that CSS file, remove it here too. And now instead import my toolbar component from /components toolbar, and there it's the toolbar file. We can omit the file extension here in create React app projects. It will add this automatically, so to say. Now we can add our toolbar component here like this, and if I save all of that, it should work, and here's my toolbar. And not looking too pretty, but hey, we didn't add any styling yet. So let's add some styling. And for that, I'll add my toolbar.css file in the same folder as the JS file, and I'll import it here. And this import will work due to the project setup we have here, which is able to also add CSS files or understand imports to these files and then automatically inject the CSS code into our running application. So this will handle the CSS code correctly. Now, I'll add a class here, a class name, as it is in JSX, not class name, that's important. And this will be my toolbar. Now the nav here, that could be toolbar navigation using some BEM CSS style here. Then here, I'll leave that out. I'll do that later. I'll take care about that hamburger button later. My logo here, I'll give this a class name of toolbar logo. And then here I'll have my class name toolbar navigation items maybe. Items. We have the unordered list in there, which we could also then select with the child selector basically. And then we have our individual list items in there. Now let's add some styling. For the overall toolbar class, which was added to the header, I want to give this a width of 100%. Let's also maybe make this fixed. So let's give it a position fixed here. And let's give it a background color. And I will use this purple color, our acadamine purple. Of course, you can use any other color. And now we get a colored toolbar. The text color, maybe not perfect yet, but we'll get there. But we have the toolbar in one color at least. Now let's also add some content below the toolbar in our app.js file. There I'll add a paragraph where I say this is the page content. And I'm doing that for a specific reason. Because if I save that, we don't see that here. We see some margin from that paragraph, but we see that the paragraph somehow is hidden beneath the toolbar. And that is because the toolbar is fixed. And that does not work together with the paragraph. Or put in other words, the paragraph does not respect the toolbar. It does not place itself beneath the toolbar because that is not how fixed positioning works. Instead, if we want to keep some space for the toolbar, we can give it a height here, maybe 56 pixels, like this. And then we can add that as some spacing above our paragraph. So we could add a main element here and then move our paragraph in there and then give that some styling. And now I will, well, I guess reintroduce the app CSS file, or we add some inline style here. So there, we could add some style. Add a JavaScript object. Now, this is a syntax which confuses a lot of people, by the way. We got double curly braces, not because we have some fancy double curly brace mustache syntax as we have it in Angular, but because we use the normal curly braces to indicate that we have some dynamic value here. And then we have inner curly braces to indicate or to simply create a JavaScript object like this. So this is creating a JavaScript object. And now on that object, I can add a margin top, now written in camel case because we're now in JavaScript, not CSS. and assigning a string value of 56 pixels or maybe 64 to have the height of the toolbar plus some extra spacing. It affects our toolbar because on the toolbar CSS, I need to get that a top position of 0 and the same for left, so that this gets positioned in the top left corner. Now this looks better. Obviously the items don't fit into the toolbar, but at least we have some spacing here between the paragraph and the toolbar. So now this is working. Now back to the toolbar. Let's work on that. And let's make sure that we control our text color there. Now, actually, all the text I have in there are links. So what I want to do is I want to control toolbar links, I guess. Or to be precise, I want to style the logo and I want to style the other links in different ways. So we can style the toolbar logo, and then we can target toolbar navigation items and any link which is nested in that class. So let's do that here. Let's target the toolbar logo first. The toolbar logo is placed on that div. So let's target an anchor tag inside of that. Simply like this, normal CSS selector. Let's give it a color, which is white. Remove the text decoration. Maybe, since it's the logo, increase the font size to, let's say, 2 rem. Like that. If we now save this, we got the logo. It's very big. Let's maybe use 1.5 rem. And I also want to work on the positioning of all of that with flexbox. So I want to ensure that my nav here, which holds all my divs, uses flexbox. So for the toolbar navigation CSS class here, which I'll add here, I'll set the display to flex. If I now save this, now we already fixed some positioning. Now I want to center everything in the middle vertically, and the default flex direction is from left to right, so it's a row, and therefore the positioning I want to fix is the positioning on the cross axis, so to say. And you can watch our flexbox videos, links can be found in the video description to learn more about that. So here I will set this cross axis positioning with align items, and I'll set this to center. With this added, now the logo and also the other elements are centered vertically. We still see that the spacing is a bit off, and to find the reason, we can open the developer tools and then simply inspect that, and we see that our nav here simply is not following the height of the header. So the fix is of course simple. For toolbar navigation, which is placed on that nav element, I set the height to 100%, and since this is nested in toolbar, we take the height set up there. So now with that, that looks a lot better. I can now also go to the navigation and give this some left and right padding. So padding should be 0 from top and bottom, but maybe 1 rem from left and right. Awesome. So now we got that logo here. That's looking good. Now let's work on our other links. And these links are placed in the toolbar navigation items class. So let me add that here. Whoops, that class selector. And now I want to target the links in there, give them some white color and some text decoration on. I also want to target them in the hover state, and I want to target them in the active state. And you could easily add another selector when they have an active class, for example, if you want to change their styling when they are selected. And there I will give them a color of our academide orange. So with that, if I save this, now that looks better, but obviously I don't want to have them in a list like that. They are inside an unordered list, which in turn is a child of toolbar navigation items. So let's add our toolbar navigation item selector, and there the unordered list. And there I'll set the list style to none. I'll remove all margin and padding that list would have. And I'll also give this a display of flex to position the list items in that unordered list next to each other. So now they're positioned next to each other, but obviously some spacing would be nice. So let's target our list items now. Toolbar navigation items list item. And there I'll simply assign some, let's say, padding left and right of 0.5 rem, we could say. And now we got some spacing between the list items. The next thing is that I want to have some spacing between the logo and these navigation items. To be very precise, they should be, well, pushed away from each other. So logo should be on the left, the other navigation items should be on the right. We can achieve this with the help of flexbox. I can add an additional div here between the logo and our navigation items. And I'll give it a class name of spacer. The class name is totally up to you, by the way. And this will not hold any content. Now I'll take that spacer class here, maybe add it here, and give it a flex value of 1. And this simply means this will take all available space. And as you can see, now it takes all the free space between the space which is occupied by the logo and the navigation items. So this is really taking shape and not looking too bad in my opinion. What we're of course missing is that Hamburger button which allows us to open our side drawer. And the side drawer is also missing, I'd say. Now let's add that Hamburger button first. And I'll actually store that in a separate component. So in the components folder, I'll add a side drawer folder. And this will hold the side drawer itself. And I'll also add the drawer toggle button.js file. You can, of course, name these things however you want. Now, let's work on that button first. Here, I'll also import React from React. This will be a stateless component, a functional component. And I'll name the constant drawer toggle button like the file name, but starting with a lowercase d, just a convention. You can name it however you want. And there we receive the props. And I will return some JSX code. And I will finally also export that constant as the default of that file. Now in there, how should this button look like? How should it work? Well, it should be a button also for accessibility reasons. So I want to use a normal button here. But of course, in that button, I want to have these free lines, which make up my hamburger. So we can add free divs in here. You could also use spans. So free divs are added. And now each div, class name, will receive a class, toggle button line maybe. So let's add this to all these divs, and the button itself will receive the toggle button class here. I'll then add my drawer toggle button.css file, and I will also import that in that JavaScript file. So here let's import drawer toggle button.css. This will add the CSS code to the final app, which will run in the browser. And now we can style it. Now let's add that button to our toolbar first of all, so that we can see it. So in the toolbar, I'll add an import where I pull in that button by going to the side drawer folder and importing the drawer toggle button. And then here, in that first div, I will add my drawer toggle button component like this. And of course, I need to import drawer toggle button from that path here for that to work. So with that adjusted import and the button being used here, let's go back. And here's the button. It's not there yet, but at least we see it. Now, first of all, let me ensure that we got some spacing between the logo and the button. So on the toolbar logo, not on the anchor tag in there, but on the div itself, I'll add some margin left of maybe 0.5 rem to ensure that there is some spacing to the button on the left. And now let's work on the button itself. We got these three divs in there. Now let's start with the button, which has the toggle button class here. This button could have a height of, let's say, 48 pixels. We can tweak this later. So now we see that is the height of the button. It's very big, actually. So let's reduce that to just 30 pixels, I guess. It's centered by default. Again, we can change that height, and I will change it right now even to 24. Yeah, let's see if that is good. I will also give it the width of, let's say, 36 pixels. So 1.5 times the height. Yeah, we can see if that works well. Maybe reduce that to 30. But now I want to, well, turn this into a button with horizontal lines, obviously. For that, I need to remove the background. So the background will be transparent. I'll set a border of none here. And I will also use my toggle button to control the focus state where I want to set the outline to none. I will give it a cursor, which is a pointer though. So now this button is invisible, and if I click it, we also don't see an outline, which is what I want. Now it's time to add these lines. So we got the toggle button line class. And if we want to use the divs in that button, I first of all have to change that button to be of display flex. And then I'll set the flex direction to column, because the default is a row, but obviously I want to position these divs not next to each other, but beneath each other, below each other. So let's now add this toggle button line class, and let's give each line a width of 100% and a height of maybe 1 pixel. I'll then give it a background, which is white. If I do that, we don't see anything there. Let's change the width to 30 pixels. And that changes. Now that's important. If you have the divs inside that button, 100% won't work in that setup. Instead, you need to give these items an explicit width. So now we have that width on our elements there. We also see that they are not inside the button, and that the button actually, if I move that up a bit, has some default padding. Now let's get rid of that padding, and on the same hand, I'll add a box sizing of border box here to make sure that the lines really stay inside of that button. Now they're all clumped up on each other basically. To change this, we can work with the flexbox and set justify content, which positions elements along the main axis, which for a column is from top to bottom. We can set this to space between. And now it will basically make sure that the free space, so the freely available space in that flexbox, is distributed between these elements. And now we see we got something which looks a bit like a hamburger icon. Now, I can change this to space around to not only have the free space between these lines, but also before and after the first and last line. If I save that, that looks much better. Now, let's try using 2 pixels instead of 1 here. And this doesn't look too bad. Now we got that hamburger icon. Maybe a bit too close to the logo. So let's go back to our toolbar CSS. And for the logo, I'll give it a margin left of 1 rem to make sure we have more distance. And with that, I'm happy. Now I want to make sure that when we click this, we see a side drawer. And for that, we obviously need to add a side drawer. So let's go to the side drawer, and let's also import React there from React. And let's create a side drawer constant, which receives props, returns some JSX in the end, and will export the side drawer constant as a default. Now let's add the JSX code here. And there, I really just want to have a nav element. That will be my side drawer. In there, an unordered list. And in that unordered list here, I'll add my list items. And there, I'll have my anchor tags, which lead to the starting page, where I have products and where I have users. Now I'll give that a class name of side drawer, and I'll add my side drawer.css file here. Let's import that side drawer CSS file into the JavaScript file. Import side drawer.css. And now we can start styling this. Now I also want to add it to my component so that we see it. And the question is, where do I add it? You could add it to the toolbar, but it's not part of the toolbar actually. It's independent of the toolbar. We can use the toolbar standalone if we want. So instead I'll add it to the app.js file. Here. There I want to add my side drawer. So here I'll add my import. Import side drawer from, and now I'll go to the components folder, import the side drawer. And here we can then add side drawer like this. Now this means that if I save that, we can see the side drawer here, in the DOM at least, here it is, but we don't see it visually. Now we can change that. First of all, I want to ensure that for my entire app, I set an inline style like this, where I set the height to 100%. This will become important to conveniently give this side drawer a height of 100% for the full page. Because if you want to have a nested element that has 100% of the page height, you could use the relatively new VH unit, but that does not support it in all browsers. Or you use 100%, but then the parent element also has to have a height of 100%. So we give this a height of 100%, and then we have to ensure that in our index CSS file, which styles the overall page, we also give our body a height of 100%, and the same for HTML itself. Also give that a height of 100%. With that, we should be able to go to the side drawer, and there we use the side drawer class. We can now style that in our CSS file, give that a height of 100%, give it a background color of white, maybe give it some box shadow, some slight drop shadow to the right, not really to the bottom, some blur, and then let's use some RGBA color, some transparent black. And important, I'll give it a position of fixed because I don't want to scroll it with the page. It should always be there and overlap the page. I'll give it a position of top of 0 and left of 0. And let's give the width, which could be, let's say, 3 or, yeah, since I typed it, 400 pixels. If we now save that, here's our side drawer. Now, obviously, we always have that side drawer now. And it would be nice to have some backdrop, so some grayed out area behind the side drawer. Now, that can also be added. And you can add it as part of the side drawer or as a separate component. Now, I will add it as a separate component, as you could use that, reuse that, in a real React app to, for example, also show it behind some modal, which you might want to open. So I will add a new folder here in components, backdrop, and in there I'll add my backdrop.js file and my backdrop.css file. And in the backdrop.js file, I'll import React from React, and then I'll create a new const, backdrop, which gets props and returns some JSX. And you know the game, I exported this as the default of that file. And now in there, a backdrop can simply just be a div with no content inside of it, with a class name of backdrop, let's say. And then we can import that CSS file here to style that. So import backdrop.css, go into the backdrop CSS file and add that backdrop class, which I'm using in the JavaScript file. And now what should a backdrop be? Now a backdrop should take the full page width and height. It should also have some background color, and it should overlap the other elements, but of course not the side drawer. So let's start by giving it a position of fixed so that you also can't scroll it away. Give it a width of 100% and a height of 100%. Give it a background of RGBA and then also that transparent black here. Maybe a little bit less black, more transparent. And let's give it a set index of 100. Now let's go to the side drawer CSS file and let's give the side drawer a set index of 200 so that it's above the backdrop. And then we can go to the app.js file and import our backdrop here. So import backdrop from components, backdrop, backdrop. And in that component here, I'll then add my backdrop like this. And if I save that, we see that backdrop here, but obviously it's below our heading. Now the reason for that is that I have to go to the backdrop CSS file, and I should also make sure that it sits in the top left corner. This is where it starts. With that, it overlaps everything, but not our side drawer. Now with that, let's go back to the side drawer, and I will actually shrink that width a little bit, and I will not only shrink it, I'll set it to 70% of the page, but I'll give it a max width of 400 pixels now. And that ensures that we have that maximum width. But now if we go to mobile mode by clicking this button here, we also have it here on the mobile device, which looks nicer. Now, obviously the elements are installed in there. So let's work on these elements in this side drawer first. Let me increase that in size a little bit. So let's work on these elements in there. Now in that side drawer, we have these navigation items. And therefore, I'll style the unordered list first of all. That unordered list will have a list style of none, and I'll set it to display flex. I'll again give it a flex direction of column because now here the elements, the navigation items should be positioned below each other. And then here I'll also style my links to give them a purple color here maybe, and also remove their text decoration by setting it to none. Now this looks better. Now some spacing between the items would be nice. And also maybe I want to center them. So here I'll go to my unordered list, which uses the flexbox, and justify content, which we previously used to space the elements or distribute the space evenly with space around. There we can also set center to center the elements on their main axis. For that to work, we just need to make sure that the flexbox container, the unordered list, takes the full height of the surrounding container. So here I'll give this a height of 100%. So that it takes the height of the full sidebar. Now let's increase the font size here a little bit, maybe to 1.2 rem. And I want to add some spacing between my list items. For each list item, I'll give it a margin of, let's say, 0.5 rem top and bottom and 0 left and right. If we now save this, this looks better. Now some hover effect would be nice because we have none on non-mobile devices. So let's go to the side drawer, add a hover effect and also an active effect when we click on it. And there I'll again just change the color to be FA923F. So now we got that hover effect. We also see that effect if we click on an item here on the mobile screen. And therefore this is working. One big thing which is not working is of course that we can't open and close that drawer dynamically. Now that is something we control with React, with JavaScript now. We got all the components and they're all functional components, which means they're not doing anything. Or they are doing something, they are rendering content, but they don't have any logic attached yet. But that is exactly what we can change now. The drawer toggle button obviously should open the drawer and clicking on the backdrop should close it. That is the logic as I want to have it. I want to control that in the app.js file, because there I got access to both the toolbar, which holds the drawer toggle button, and to the side drawer and backdrop. And I need to work with these three components, because I need to be able to listen to a click to the button in the toolbar, and then I need to be able to remove the side drawer and the backdrop. Let's start by reacting to a click on the toolbar. First of all, I'll add a method here to my app component. I'll name that drawer toggle click handler. And I'll define that function with this modern arrow function syntax here, which adds it as a property to the app component, to the app object, but ensures that the this keyword keeps its scope and will always refer to this component. And then in there, I want to change my state, of course. Now let's set up the state here. My initial state, which we can set up like this in modern React, my initial state has the information whether the toolbar, whether the side drawer is visible or not. So here I'll just add side drawer open and set that to false initially. Now here in drawer toggle click handler, I'll therefore call this set state and I'll use the function form of the set state method because I need to access the previous state. And it's a bad practice to do that like this. You shouldn't do side drawer this state side drawer open and reverse it like this. This will probably work, but due to the way React now updates the state, since it batches these updates, you're not guaranteed that your state changed whenever this executes the next time. So a better way is to use the function form where you pass a function to set state. And in that function here, you will receive the previous state as an argument. This is passed into the function by React. And then here, you return your object which updates the state. And there you can now set side drawer open to the opposite of previous state side drawer open. So now this will basically make sure that if the side drawer was open, so if that was true, it will now be saved as false and the other way around. Now that's my drawer toggle click handler. I can now use the side drawer open state to decide whether the side drawer and the backdrop are shown. So we can do that by simply using a ternary expression here, or more elegantly use a if statement and add a variable side drawer, which is null by default or simply undefined, and another one, backdrop, which is also undefined. And then I'll add a if check and see if this state, side drawer open, if that is true. If it is true, then side drawer will be equal to, well, side drawer like this, and backdrop will be equal to backdrop. And we can, of course, store JSX in JavaScript variables like this because JSX is just JavaScript in the end. Now we can reference these variables here, side drawer and backdrop, like this. So I'm pointing at these variables, and I'm separating the two because I want to be able to control the backdrop independent from the side drawer for the reason I mentioned. You could reuse that backdrop for other components like modals. With that saved, we don't see the side drawer and we don't see the backdrop because initially this is false. Side drawer open is false. Now I need to make sure that the drawer toggle click handler can get triggered. And therefore I'll pass it to the toolbar because the toolbar will hold the button which triggers that. So I need to pass a prop to the toolbar, and I'll name it drawer click handler, and I'll point to this drawer toggle click handler. Now in the toolbar we can work with that prop, with the drawer click handler prop. In the toolbar we receive props, of course, and now I just need to forward this to my drawer toggle button. There, let's say we have the click property, and I forward props and then drawer click handler. So the prop name I used in my app.js file. Now we'll have the click prop here in the drawer toggle button. So let's move to the drawer toggle button, and there I'll add on click, the normal on click listener. And when that gets fired, I'll execute the method which I have received on props click. So in case you're relatively new to React, what we're doing here is I'm passing around a reference to this method. The drawer toggle click handler is this method. And please note, I'm not executing it here. I'm not adding parentheses. This would execute it immediately. I don't want to execute it immediately. Instead, I pass a reference like this, which means I pass the address to that method. I passed it with props, a concept you should know. Otherwise, take my full React course. So I passed that with props to toolbar, and there I simply forward it to the drawer toggle button by using the function reference which I receive on these props and passing it to the click props on the drawer toggle button. And there I'm assigning it to the on click listener, so props click in the end holds a reference, the address of a method, of a function which should get executed when this gets clicked. With that, let's save this. And if I now click that hamburger, we indeed see our backdrop and the side drawer. Now we can't close it because we haven't done anything to ensure that the backdrop would close this. For that, let's go back to the app.js file and let's add another method, the backdrop click handler. And I'll register this in a more generic way because you could do multiple things when it is clicked. Maybe you also want to close modals if you have any. So in there, what I will do is I will close my side drawer, but you could also add other functionalities here. So I will call this setState, and now I don't need the function form because I don't care about the previous state of the side drawer. I'll just set side drawer open to false, like this. So this will always close it. And now I just need to register this on my backdrop. So I will pass it to my backdrop component here. There I will pass the click prop. You can name this however you want, of course. And I'll point to my backdrop click handler. Again, the same logic as before. We're passing a reference to this function. So with that, let's go to the backdrop component. And there we have the props. We have that div. Let's add the on click listener which we of course can add there too. We're not limited to buttons. And listen or execute whatever we have in the click prop. And there we will have our address to the drawer toggle, to the backdrop click handler, excuse me. Save everything, and now we can open that, and we can click that backdrop to close it. So this now works. Now let's finish this up by adding a nice animation. This side drawer should slide in from the left, let's say. And let me decrease that drop shadow. That really is a bit too much. So there, I will actually reduce that blurriness to 3 pixels. And give that 1 pixel here. Now maybe 7 pixels actually. Yeah, I like that more. It's a nicer box shadow in my opinion. But back to the animation. That is what I want to do. Now to play an animation, for the side drawer only by the way, not for the backdrop, I can't add it and remove it as I'm currently doing it. Instead, the side drawer should always be present. So let's get rid of that side drawer variable here. And let's get rid of that assignment. I only want to control the backdrop like this. The side drawer should always be present, but I want to pass it the information whether it should be shown or not. And then I can use some CSS transitions to move it out of the screen and transition that movement and move it back in. So here, let's add a prop, maybe name it show, and bind to this state side drawer open. So this will be true or false. Now in the side drawer, we can use that. There, I want to add some class, depending on whether this is true or false. And then I want to add some CSS to that class to make sure this looks correct. For that, I'll actually use curly braces because I'll write more than just that return statement now. I will still return my nav here and wrap that in parentheses to ensure that I can write multi-line JSX code here. But before I return, I want to construct the classes I want to attach here. That will be my side drawer, but also an additional class if it is open. So here I'll have a let statement, drawer classes maybe. That is an array where I have the side drawer, so the class which is currently attached, the class name of the class which is currently attached. And then I'll check if props, and now the prop we used was show, right? It's this prop here, show. So that is the name. If that is true, then I'll add another class here by pushing it, or better, by simply setting drawer classes now to a new array, which is the old array, and an additional class, open. And of course, I could also just manage a string here, to be honest. I was thinking about doing it like this. I can now use my drawer classes here and join them with an empty space between the elements, and this would take my arrays and convert this to a string. This is good if you push and pop and do things like that, but since I really only have 2 scenarios here, I can also just work with a string. So I either have that string with one class, or I have that string here with side drawer and open, and then I just use that string here. So my class name is a string with 1 or with 2 classes. And now we can use the open class to change the positioning of that side drawer. So let's go back, and here I will add side drawer.open to make sure that I only style elements which have an open class and the side drawer class. And then I will transform this. I will transform this to translate it on the x-axis, so to move it to the left and right from its original position. And I will use translate x minus 0 here. That is the position where I want to have it. So its default position, or the normal position it would normally have. But by default, if open is not added, I'll now set this to minus 100% to move it to the left by its full width. Now, if I save that, we don't see the drawer, but if I click that, we see it, and now it disappears. But it still pops in. The reason for this is that we don't animate this transition from transform translate x minus 100% to transform translate x 0. Thankfully, CSS makes such an animation easy. It has built-in transitions. You add them with the transition property, then you define which property, so changes in which property do you want to animate. And I want to animate changes in the transform property. So I'll listen to transform, so to say. Then I'll define the duration of the transition. So how long should the animation be? How slowly should I be transitioning from state A to state B? And I'll use .3 seconds. And you can also define a timing function to define how fast should it move, or not how fast, but how should the available time be distributed. So should it start fast and end slow, start slow and end fast? I'll use ease out to start fast and end slow. And with that, if I now save this, now you'll see it slides in and it disappears. And I really like this style now. And that is our navigation here with a side drawer. The only missing thing is that I want to use a media query to remove my items here in the toolbar if I'm in mobile view. I only want to have them in desktop view. And on the other hand, remove my side drawer and the toggle button in desktop view and only have that in mobile view. So let's add this to finish this up. For that, let's first go to the toolbar. And I want to make sure that we don't see toolbar navigation items if we're in mobile mode. Well, that is relatively easy. We can add a media query here at the end of the file maybe with add media and define a max width of, let's say, 768 pixels. So if I'm below that mark, I'll set the display to none. And of course, I need to define for what. So the for what will be my toolbar navigation items. Then I'll set display to none. And this means I don't see them here, but I do see them here on the desktop. Now, this looks wrong here, but I'm just zoomed in. So this normally would be more than 768 pixels, but since I zoomed in so that you can read that a bit better, it's actually less. So I need to decrease the size of my DevTools to be on a desktop mode. But that's just because I zoomed in. So that is working. Now on mobile, that also looks good. The side drawer is always available there. This should not be available on desktop mode though. And therefore, I'll go to my side drawer first of all and add a media query there too. Add media, and there I'll say if we are having a minimum width of 696 pixels, so one above the other criteria. If we do have that, then I'll take my side drawer and add display none, so it will never be visible then. So even if we somehow had expanded it, and we then are on desktop mode, we have the backdrop, but not the side drawer. And the backdrop should always be there if we want it, because we could use it for modals and so on. Of course, that toggle button should also disappear. And I can control that in the toolbar if I want. You could also do it on the button itself and set display to none there, whatever you prefer. I'll do it on the toolbar. And there I can say that first div here, and I'll give it a class name now. Toolbar toggle button, that should not be visible on big screens. So here I'll make sure that I add another media query, min width 769 pixels. If I got that, then my newly added class will have a display of none. So if that's saved, we don't have that button on big screens, but we do have it on small screens. Now let's fine tune the logo. We don't need the margin left then. So that logo, toolbar logo, which has margin left on big screens, if we don't have a button, well then there is no need to have a margin, right? So in this case, I'll set margin left to 0 to avoid this unnecessary margin. So if that's saved, no margin here, looking fine here, everything working on mobile, no side drawer on desktop. And that is the responsive navigation with the side drawer finished on React. Obviously, you can do more. You can, for example, animate that hamburger icon here, or style that side drawer differently, style the toolbar differently. I'm happy with the current setup, and I hope that this was useful, that you liked it. I liked it. I like videos like this. I hope you learned something useful, and I hope to see you in other videos too. Bye.